Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We're starting a little bit late, I think, because of AV issues. So I think we're going to have to breeze through. So you are in the right place if you wanted to hear about preferring object orientation to metaprogramming. My name is Stephen Harms. Just a brief rundown. I live in San Francisco, like a great many of you. You can tweet at me at sgharms. I've also provided an email address if you'd like to interact in a slower form of communication. What I'd like to do is talk to you about preferring object orientation to metaprogramming. Now, I have to admit, I'm a little bit scared to be up here because 2 years ago, I was extolling the virtues of metaprogramming left and right in New Orleans. So, well, thank you very much. But you can all tell your significant other that apparently one time a programmer did admit that he or she was wrong. So I was wrong, and I hope to guide you on that journey. Standing up here and saying you're wrong is a very interesting experience, but I have been advised that I should take my fear out of my back pocket and put it into me. I would like to say I love metaprogramming. It's a fascinating topic. It's rich. It's something very special to Ruby, and I first got exposed to it at RUBYCONF 2007. Hosted by our friend Dr. Jim Freeze. Jim might be here. I don't see him. But I can't remember who it was, but somebody at lunch showed me this thing here, this thing on line 4, where I don't know what you are, but when I saw that, I was like, this is crazy. What language is this? At the time, I was coming from Perl, and regrettably, Perl made solving some problems exceedingly painful. So I was pretty much on... I was undecided between Python and Ruby, but when I saw that thing, I was like, whatever language uses that to do something like define methods, I was won over. And then I saw something crazy like this, is that you could create instances and just put methods only on that instance and not let other classes have access to it. I was thinking, this is why my Perl has sucked so bad. The reason Perl sucks is because Perl sucks and it doesn't have awesome constructs like this. It is not because I'm an ignorant, uninformed programmer. It's because Perl sucks. And if you're looking for something that was absolutely about to prove to you how bad Perl sucked and how awesome I was, it was that I could basically invoke methods that didn't exist, and Ruby would help me out. It would let me just keep stringing that noose along so that I could hang myself good and proper later on. It would not blow up on me, and I could say, hey, don't blow up, I want you to do something else. In this case, summon hateful spirits of the netherworld as inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. But time passed, and thanks to my tools that I showed you, the metaprogramming tools, I was able to build really, really complex software. And I was so proud of what metaprogramming made possible that I went to New Orleans in 2011 and told all of you, some of you, how great metaprogramming was and what it could provide you. I had to live with that code for 2 years, which involved me having to refactor it, having to own it, and some of my opinions might have changed. So that's what this talk is about, is how might your opinions change if you are the maintainer of a heavily metaprogrammed library. We're going to be guided by 3 questions here. The first question is, when should I use metaprogramming? The second is, when should I prefer something else? And if something else, what is that something? Regrettably, every time you talk about metaprogramming, you have to define it first. Ruby Rogues number 12, Ruby Rogues number 80, my talk in 2001, you always have to define the terms, or else you're liable to get cited and kicked out of RubyConf to come. So my definition, wrong button. My definition is that you're writing code that redirects past messages at runtime, or you're altering the structures that do the passing at runtime. At runtime. You see, Ruby is an interpreted language, so there's really no difference between compile time and execution time. Everything lives in the space of runtime. But I would like to ask everyone's indulgence for a moment to imagine that there is a magical phase right before runtime called parse time. And parse time is where your constant trees is established. It's where all of your libraries are required. And then there's something else that happens once you enter the main thread of execution. So that main thread part is runtime. The part that happens before is parse time. So redirecting past messages at runtime, providing and altering those structures at runtime. That's metaprogramming. If we've all agreed that that's the standard base of reference, the question that I asked in 2011 was, how will I know that I should use metaprogramming? And I took that question at that time to be a reflection on, how do I know I'm smart enough to use metaprogramming? And at that time, I was feeling pretty damn smart. And I wanted everyone else to feel that smart and to jump off that metaprogramming cliff. I think the question now is, when should I ever use metaprogramming? And I think I have a new answer for that one. I think the answer is never. Oh, all right, I'm going to hedge my bets. Practically never. In the contrary case, the question would be, well, when should I use something else? Always. Practically always. The trouble, I said in 2011, was that we had unclear guidance about how to move forward in metaprogramming. It tended to be something that was kind of showed by people at conferences and something that was kind of obliquely referred to. But it was never really explained as, here's a technique, here's how you can grow better in it, here's how you can learn more about it. And there's a good reason for that. I'll quote Tim Connor, whom I also quoted in 2011, was that the first rule of metaprogramming is you don't talk about it because you'll get people to use it. Accurate. And then the second rule is that when you do introduce it, you introduce a level of complexity that most people, due to just unfamiliarity, will not understand how to parse. And now here's the sentence that kills me, is that unfortunately you cannot simply, sorry, that was a typo, be told not to metaprogram. You must see it for yourself. That's the part I take issue with. I can show you, I believe, in the remainder of this presentation, of why you should not use metaprogramming. In short, I want you to say no to metaprogramming. In fact, if you're from the Pacific Northwest, I want you to say cacao to metaprogramming. Now, I'm going to take a bit of a sidelong step here, and I'm going to kind of follow in the spirit of the philosophers Deleuze and Guattari. I'm going to pick apart the term metaprogramming itself. It is a bad term. First of all, it's hard to define. Every speaker, every time they use the word metaprogramming, has to come in and define what they mean in order to try to establish some sort of consensual basis. If the term has to be renegotiated all the time, what is its value? Nothing. Secondarily, I have a theory that it gets by a lot of time because it has this really awesome Greek prefix at the beginning of meta. When I was that young programmer in Austin, somebody showed me metaprogramming, and I thought, my gosh, I am so stupid. I'm so ignorant. I don't know what metaprogramming is. I missed that class in the CS curriculum. I don't know what it's about. And having dug into it, I've dug into it, and I understand it now, and it's just a bad idea. And it skates by because it has this cool topic. Write a CFP, include the word metaprogramming, you'll get a speaker slot. I know. It's a bad term, but it's also a bad technique. Recall, foremost, let me say that it has a bad conceptual framework, and I will demonstrate this. The code itself, Ruby, will tell you, don't do this. You can choose to ignore it like me, but Ruby will try to help you avoid this trap. And lastly, I want to talk a little bit about normative social standards vis-a-vis metaprogramming. So recall that when we talked about my definition of metaprogramming, is we focused relentlessly on this concept of runtime. And here's the interesting thing, is that runtime specifies a temporality to these clauses. But here's the thing, check out the verb, alters, redirects. These are verbs that express surprise. These are verbs that express something not doing what was expected. Metaprogramming is writing code that willfully does something that's surprising and contrary to convention. I think there's a special word for that, right? You write code sometimes, and it does something that you don't expect, right? That one. Yeah. Metaprogramming, in effect, is engineering bugs that do the right thing. Not only that, but they do it adventitiously. I'm including this not because I'm talking down to you, but I do realize English isn't the first language of some people in the audience. Adventitious, coming from another source, not inherent or innate. If your code does not innately do the right thing, that means it is more likely to do the wrong thing. So you are quite literally putting yourself in a position of possible accident. Or in short, metaprogramming is a series of aberrations that just happen to produce the right output most of the time. Or at least as much as your test coverage says that they produce the right output. Missing image. Again, another form of bug. It's a reminder of that when you think things are okay, they are in fact not okay. So let's talk about how, whoa, this is a broken image. Well, that's a new bug for me too. Let's see. Okay, well, I'm sorry. I can't show you this one because the image isn't on this asset. But the point being is that if you try to use a heavily metaprogrammed library, you know that thing in IRB or pry where you can do tab to complete a method name? Metaprogrammed methods do not appear as part of that. That is Ruby trying to tell you, hey, I don't know what you're talking about, and the conventions and expectations that I have, you are not following. If you choose not to follow those conventions, it's on you. And because it's on you, you have the obligation to write extensive amounts of test coverage. In this case, I had to write 1,646 assertions to feel like my library was doing the right thing. Whereas if I had chosen smaller, more constrained scopes of my objects, I would have felt more comfortable having fewer of them. As it stands, I had to write near 2,000, well, all right, near 1,600 assertions to feel comfortable in my code. You should never have to write that many assertions to feel comfortable in your code. I'd also like to point out that, as I showed in an earlier sample, when you have metaprogrammed code hinging on method missing, if something blows up, you're catching the method missing error. Instead of your error bubbling up to something saying, hey, you messed up, you need to backtrack this and fix it, instead now you bear the responsibility for handling how method missing works. And because of that, you're taking on an additional cognitive burden, and you're taking on an additional weight that you just should not have to take on. I spoke about social conventions. You don't have to listen to me, and you don't necessarily have to listen to code, but you could listen to some dude on Twitter, which is what a lot of people do, apparently. Joshua Timberman said, well, actually, he didn't say, he meta-said. He meta-tweeted that someone said that his amount of disdain for Ruby projects is directly proportional to the amount of magic it contains. Metaprogramming, intercepting method missing, bolting on behavior onto instances, all of these things in sum total account for magic. So what I'd like to do is put an end to, quote, metaprogramming. What I'd like for us to do is to retire the term, retire the talks, and move on. I would like for this to be, apologies to Francis Fukuyama, I would like this to be the last man standing on the topic of metaprogramming. I think we all need to move on, and let's just close the door. Now the question is, if you're going to say that something is bad, what do you recommend you replace it with? So what I would like to do is talk about the replacement to metaprogramming. The replacement to metaprogramming would, of course, be something like anti-metaprogramming. It would be taking out all of that magic. It would be taking out all of your method missing calls, your const get calls. It would be taking out all those instance evals, class evals. It would be taking out all these weird closure things. Anti-metaprogramming code would be deducible from the parse time state. That is to say, you could look at the code at rest and figure out what's going on. I alluded earlier that I considered metaprogramming often to be a type of bug. Often to understand the state of the application at the time, you wind up having to use debugging tools. As you're saying, well, why is this not doing what I expect? What do you have to do? You have to drop in a pry binding, or you have to put in bybug or a debugger statement just to figure out what's going on. And the reason is because you're doing weird stuff at runtime. Don't do it. I also believe that anti-metaprogramming code, also known as good code, demonstrates its reason and its purpose in itself. That is to say, it's obvious. So let's take a look at some anti-patterns that I implemented around metaprogramming. First one, Oh man, that's really unfortunate. Let's see here, what can I do about this? I want to know why it's showing up on my screen. Is it? Oh. Okay. Yes. Thank you all. Whew. Yeah, master debugger back here. Thank you. Wow. Okay. Thanks so much. That was really helpful. Go team. Obviously, some garbage collectors in the audience. I would like to point out define method. Define method. Rubyists who are new to the language may be surprised to find out that you can define methods based on picking out terms and then creating them dynamically at runtime. Don't do this. This is bad. And you may say, oh, well, that's not so bad, Stephen. You have this thing called prefix, and you have an inner and an outer. I get what's going on here. But the trouble you're going to have is that it's not greppable. And by grep, I mean you can use ACK or RAC or some sort of searcher through your code. If you're looking for the method that's called tear down the pop singer, you're not going to find it because it's somehow being fabricated at runtime. You've basically made your code opaque to other introspective tools. Don't do that. It's so much better just to write it out. And if you're complaining about writing it out, get a better editor because really your editor should be able to take care of this amount of pain for you. Again, it has low grepability and it has very poor graspability. An alternative I propose is just to use plain old, good old def. Right? Here it is. Where is tear down the pop singer defined? Right there. Or, excuse me. Right there, yeah. The ability to resolve problems is so much easier when you have this available to you. I'd also like to talk about another anti-pattern that I've seen recently discussed is the junk drawer module. Now, if you took my previous recommendation that you actually define your methods, you may say, well, I've created a large class. I don't like that. So what I'm going to proceed to do is I'm going to bubble that out into a module, and then I'm going to include that module into the class. Don't do this. This is a classic bad anti-pattern. Because what you've basically done is you've created a namespace that has absolutely no purpose for its existence. It is important that we as programmers, when communicating with other programmers who will read our code and not our comments, we need to be able to understand what is going on in this module. What is the relationship? Why is raise the roof with tear down the pop star? There is no good reason. We have no intentionality behind that module. And as a result of it, our class and our module name will be entirely opaque to any other programmer who comes along. Again, it's obvious moderately because it's greppable, but the graspability of it is poor. And as you add additional modules, that graspability will go down precipitously. So don't create junk drawer mix-ins using Ruby's modules. I think Sarah May brought this up recently. She said, modules may solve the size. You've got fewer lines of code, but you've done nothing to illuminate, to open the mind of a programmer who's coming along to this particular bit of code. You could get slightly better. What if you change those mix-in names and gave them something like some hint of what they are? But really, you're not getting much for that level. You still have the greppability, moderate graspability, but it's trending down. Here's an anti-pattern that totally sucks. I did this one heavily, and I'm so embarrassed to show it. I'm going to show it right now. What would happen if instead of actually creating modules, you decided to create anonymous modules? Wow, you've just completely hung yourself. That was awesome. And the reason you've hanged yourself is because, look, you get this really nice thing by looking at Ruby's ancestor chain, is you can ask an object, or rather ask an object's class what the inheritance chain of it is. You can say, where do you get methods? Where do you get properties? So I can see class method defer gets modules from pop singer moves and housing moves and object and kernel and basic object. That's great. Guess what? When you use anonymous modules, you get none of that. So congratulations, you got to use a really, really cool stylistic invocation that made your code more opaque. That one hurt. So again, there's really no hope at this point. You've really, really shot yourself in your foot. Here's another anti-pattern that I completely committed. How about this one? What if you wanted to make a class that's including a module do something crazy when it included that module? Wouldn't that be completely opaque? Wouldn't that be impossible to understand? Yes. Look at this. This is humiliating. You may not be aware that module implements a callback method so that when you include a module, magic happens. And what if, in that silent bit of magic, you decided to do magic back on the thing that included the module? This is just pure insanity. I don't even know what I was thinking. I don't do drugs, but I don't know what I was thinking. I can kind of see like a bit of nobility in here. There's a hint of the desire to want to invert dependencies. But if you choose to invert a dependency, which we'll talk about in just a moment, there are many more obvious ways of doing it. So don't do this. So again, low gripability, abandon all hope. Low graspability, abandon all hope. Do not do this. Here's an interesting pattern. Here's where things start getting a little bit better. What if you chose to use the strategy pattern to apply behavior to the inverted class? So let's take a look at this. So what if I decided to put those housing moves in a module that I'm going to call a strategy? Now, I realized somebody's going to take me a task on Twitter and say, oh, you're dumb, you don't understand what the strategy pattern's about. It's not modules, it's classes. Okay, I get it. But for the sake of this argument, let's kind of keep with the idea that what is happening in these strategies is that I've basically given this mixin a meaningful name. I've said this mixin isn't just a mixin of some random methods that you want to throw into your class. What I'm saying is that there's an intention behind it, is that if you're interested in housing moves, you're going to have some relationship with this particular strategy. So here's how I chose to invert that dependency, is what happens is that when you create a method defer class, it then proceeds to instantiate a class called apply core strategies, passing itself. The apply core strategies then looks at the essential strategies, pretty intelligible for the next programmer, of housing move strategy and pop move strategy, and it proceeds to bolt those on the calling class. So I feel like at this place we're actually getting a hint of we're starting to tease apart some of the metaprogramming. We're starting to create small, tiny classes that bear responsibility for certain tasks of thinking. And I can definitely say the woman who taught me to start thinking in these terms was Sandy Metz. So I can't say enough about how she dug me out of my conceptual bad spot by introducing me to some of these ideas. Again, the obviousness is moving upward. The reason is that we can always take a look and you say, oh, well, you implemented this method poorly, or this method poorly, or this strategy is poorly named, or why are we doing this with modules? Why don't we use classes so that they can have meaningful state? We're trending in a good direction. We're trending out of opaqueness and difficulty that we normally associate with metaprogramming, and we're moving to something that's more deducible, that has smaller scope, that's greppable. It's also more graspable. Again, fewer lines of code, higher graspability. That's it. On the topic of good OO, I don't have to say Sandy taught me everything I can stand to know on the topic. The heart of what makes metaprogramming so bad is that it puts a very heavy cognitive burden on the developer. And what I like to say is that it puts a mind of God burden on the developer. Specifically, if you look at metaprogramming techniques that break object encapsulation, you can actually start to see that metaprogramming is the last refuge of the procedural programmer. You have to hold in your mind all of the possible methods and all of the possible variables that could be called in all of the possible code paths. If you're saying, no, Ruby, don't do your default blow-up behavior on method missing, you're saying, I'll take that responsibility on. If you're cracking open someone else's class, you're saying, don't worry, thread class. I'll take responsibility in making sure that all your interfaces always work and all the possible code. And if you basically say, oh, I need to define core methods within the Ruby language by defining a kernel method, what you're saying is, don't worry, Ruby, I got you on this one. You were deficient, I know better. Am I really ever going to say that to Mats? I'm not. Lovable Angry Panda, Rain Heinrichs, has this pretty succinctly said, is if you're going to go around monkeying with the core object class or the core fundaments of the Ruby universe, he and his loved ones should be under no obligation to maintain your level of insanity. And in fact, what I love about RubyConf is that as you write your talk, you write it in a vacuum, and then all of a sudden you come to RubyConf and you pick up these mimetic currents that are floating about. And what I've seen in a number of talks, particularly yesterday, was Ruby is maturing. And as a result of it, we now have a nice variety of gems where people have shared their solutions to famous problems that other developers might encounter. But when you metaprogram, you make it so that your code can't interact predictably with other people's libraries. Jason Clark talked about extending gems. He was talking about problems that he had at New Relic with other developers stomping on his namespace. I mean, these are developers who sit, in San Francisco, so it's not a very big place. So he could see these developers every day, and they still manage to step on each other's toes. What happens in the case that your gem does something where it overrides some core kernel functionality, where it overrides the core functionality of thread or module or object? Your mind of God is going to be put in direct contention with someone else's mind of God. And I'm not sure how that ends, depending on your theology, but I'm pretty sure it's bad for us. Also, Emily yesterday talked a lot about writing good APIs for other developers to be able to make use of your gems. Again, metaprogramming requires that everyone else enter your mind of God in order to code around the barriers that you build. So I really, really discourage any pattern which looks anything like taking on the mind of God, taking on the full level of responsibility for managing all levels of interaction. Again, these three particular recipes in the metaprogramming canon are extremely dangerous. Greppable, I don't know, sometimes, depending on how things are named. Are they graspable? Not really. They usually have very unpredictable behavior. What I prefer instead are these two bread and butter solutions out of the object orientation playbook, strategies and delegates. I showed strategies a little bit earlier, where what would happen is that you say, okay, well, including class, I want you to take on some behavior, but managing that bolt-on of the behavior can be handled somewhere else. And this is a type of interaction which should be intimately familiar to all of us. As Americans, or those of us who are Americans, we are bred on the model of the assembly line, of the Henry Ford model. The great innovation of Ford was not the car, but the assembly line. We think about the chassis coming down that assembly line. It stops at a little station. That station puts on wheels. The next station puts on windows. The next station puts on doors. Hopefully it puts on the doors before the windows, but yeah, depending on which car you have, I suppose. But the point being is that the idea that you need to have the chassis go, hey, I need wheels, and bolt it on itself. Hey, I need windows. Hey, I need doors. You're making that chassis participate in a mind of God type of behavior. You should think of the classes as you construct them as being on an assembly line. Delegate that big piece you're building to a station. Ask for it back. Move down to the next station. Ask it back. One other anti-pattern is laziness lookups. Constant get and constantize. These make your code virtually ungreppable. It's very hard to find that place where somebody chose to, why did they constantize some string that came from a user? Who knows? It's ungreppable. Don't do it. I like to type it out, and I'll just ask the simple question, what's wrong with a hash? I mean, a hash is so greppable. A hash is so friendly. You look at it. You know what's going on. Why do you need to use constantize? Just to be cool. Don't do that. Don't do it. So I'd like to talk about principal techniques for happier programming. Make lots of small, greppable classes. Lots of them. There's nothing wrong with lots of classes. A lot of people say, well, it requires me to open up a lot of files. If that's the problem, learn your editor better, because editors are now very good at cutting vertically as well as horizontally. Things like C tags, I know Sublime, Fuzzy Search. Be more comfortable creating lots and lots of tiny classes. prefer composition and delegation. That is to say, don't look to have a mind of God object that rigs itself together. Look for collaborators within your object space to provide small little objects which are experts in singular particular fields. The pattern, or the fancy name for this is injection. That's when you create a something special and then pass it in to an object that will create a concert of those passed in objects. I encourage you to love inversion. Inversion is just, it opens up so many pathways of thought, is that if you think that you need to manually bolt everything on yourself, participate in that God pattern, inversion is freedom from that. When you engage in the God pattern delusion, what you are basically saying is that I don't trust anyone. You're being a totalitarian. Build small objects, yield to those objects, and trust those tiny objects to do the right thing. Lastly, a thing that's kind of been in the memetics of this conference is, well, what to do about comments? Should we have comments, not comments? If you embrace the strategy pattern, your strategies will usually reflect that thing you're commenting, like deal with Bob's brain-dead hack for deadlocks. If you name a strategy that way, it's very obvious why you did it, what it's for, and it turns out that the object namespace can teach other readers of your code as much about your code as a comment could. Further, comments age rapidly. Code is always going to be executed. So keep in mind that your code will always speak louder than your comment. For further reference, practical object-oriented design with Ruby. I can't sing it highly enough. As a programmer, I was very frustrated. I was very painted into a corner. In 7 chapters, Sandy Metz can help you out of your particular corner and will invite you beyond. And by beyond, the next book that helped me get further out was Refactoring the Ruby Edition, and thirdly, the Design Patterns in Ruby book. I don't know if they intended it, but Addison Wesley has basically built a stack of 3 books that are superb at moving you from a beginner to intermediate Rubyist to maybe an intermediate, advanced, object-oriented, object-loving Rubyist. So winding up, metaprogramming, don't write more of it. Let's just stop. Do understand it. The reason you have to understand it is, well, there's a whole lot of legacy code out there that needs some refactoring. And the other part is that it's also a very helpful technique when you're in a really, really difficult debugger situation. If you need to live update something, it's very handy. Although that said, I saw some things in Pry yesterday that make this less and less of a necessity. So use it only to refactor it. It seems to be the future direction. I'd like to thank everyone I work with at Shopatumi. All of them have dealt with my kooky ideas about metaprogramming for a long time, and some of them have let me know quite noisily that they don't like it. I want to thank the Addison Wesley authors who have a really great transitional series for developers. Thank my lovely girlfriend, Lauren, who put up with me yelling about this sort of stuff at dinner. And I want to thank everyone here, because you are all my favorite garbage collectors. There is no shame in garbage collecting. It is a great and noble profession. You have to keep in mind that the scarab was holy in Egypt, and that's the lowliest of the garbage collectors of all. So I hope that you'll take forward a lot of the object-oriented techniques that I've presented to you. I hope that you'll use them to attack code. And I furthermore hope that you'll forgive me for spreading a bad meme that metaprogramming was an awesome thing to do. Thanks so much. And I'll say one last word, is that I hope all of you always have the courage to face your problems, and when they feel a little bit too large, just remark to your heart, all is well, and be ready to give those talks. I'm ready to hear some new garbage collectors next year. So thank you again.